back to Razmafzar TV. Hi, Bede. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Very fine, very good. We are going to continue with our discussion on European longbow, English longbow. Today, we are going to concentrate on techniques, relevant techniques for using them, shooting them. Just I have a question. Let us start by grasping the bow grip. How many types of grasping do they have?
There's virtually no documentation of grasping. All we've got is painting. The earliest work on English archery, Toxophilus by Roger Askin, doesn't give any precise information about how to grasp the bow. This is typical for European archery manuals in any language. There wasn't that kind of, well, first of all, the bow handles didn't really here's what an English longbow handle is like. This is a current one. It has a kind of built up leather handle, and this type of handle was popular from probably the 17th century up until today. And it really, you can hold it like that, bearing in mind the arrow's here, and you can hold it like that, or you can hold it like that. There are different ways of holding it, but they were not specified in the literature. It's really, this is the big difference between the Middle Eastern and Chinese literature, and Korean, for that matter, Japanese as well. They always talk about how you hold the bow. Now, in Korean and Japanese archery, there's basically only one way to hold the bow. Though I say that about modern archery. The older Korean books about archery were influenced by Ming Dynasty books, so it's quite possible, like the Chinese, they knew about various types of grip. But for the English, essentially what they're trying to do, because the bows are so heavy, and this is not strung. So what they were trying to do was get as much of the hand in contact with the bow. So the thenar and hypothenar eminences on the palm. Wait a minute, I'll see if I can get this where you can see. So both of these areas are in contact with the belly of the bow to give full. You actually see people occasionally twist the bow out like that when they're at full draw. Just hit my light. This causes. This is one of the reasons that some people have much more severe string impacts on their forearm shooting longbows than like other people. If your hand is fairly straight, then the impact chances are lower. If your hand is turned out like that, then the impact chances are higher, because when the pressure of the bow is released, your hand may straighten out, and that will throw the string into your forearm. Now, I don't know whether people have more problems because of that. I think it's likely, but people shooting very strong longbows, I've noticed watching on video and in person when I've been around people, don't seem to hit themselves on the forearm very much. People shooting lighter bows seem to have more trouble. And I think that might be because the strong bow pulls the string so much faster and more powerfully that it doesn't get a chance to oscillate very much. And the heavy arrow also kind of takes a lot of the energy out of the bowstring. When you look at old paintings, say the lateral Psalter, which is the 1300s, I think, the braces, that is the protection for the forearm, are often only small discs, and they sit in a particular place, which suggests that any individual archer knew exactly where the string might hit him. So it wasn't a slide down the arm hit, it was a point hit. The Tudor braces that were recovered from the Mary Rose and others that are in collections. There are Dutch braces that have survived, made of ivory from the 1600s. They tend to cover at least half of the forearm. As I say, I don't, from personal experience, know. And it's not something I actually thought until we started talking about it, to ask a person who shot heavy longbows, because the biggest problem with heavy bows when you're shooting them is losing control, so that you're not shooting regularly, and that could be an issue with heavy longbows. But the people I've seen actually shoot in front of me, I can't remember too many occasions where they actually hit themselves. Maybe, you know, in the general excitement of these big heavy bows shooting big heavy arrows, I might have missed it.
Yes.
But there's no, I don't have any memory of it. I have memories of what impressed me most watching people shoot heavy bows, and you can see the same thing on YouTube, is that they're getting almost a perfect loose off their forefinger, which means that in the process of setting up their bow, they've got an exact place. They know exactly where on the string to hold.
Yes.
And that also suggests that they've got I mean, like on a bow like this, you know exactly where you're going to put the arrow, because it's got a little inset piece of, in this case, mother of pearl,
Yes.
to show where the arrow goes and protect the yew, because yew is a easily dented wood.
Yeah.
It's not like a super hardwood. And I'm not talking about hardwood as a definition of timbers. Hard and softwood actually refers to softwoods are coniferous woods and hardwoods are all the rest, basically. So a hardwood can actually be softer than a softwood. For instance, you know, like it's, you know, these are internal structures of wood, so it's not really appropriate to judge them by that. It's interesting when you look at this bow, which belongs to a friend of mine. You'll notice there are 3 layers in it. Sometime in the 17th, 18th century, I think, it may be earlier, and experts on longbows would know this. On occasions, people started laminating bows up from different types of wood, or they would maybe have some really good yew heartwood, but the sapwood on that particular tree wasn't any good, but they've got another tree that's got good sapwood and the heartwoods. So bowyers would keep these and then glue them together, because they knew how to glue efficiently, and they knew how to protect the glue from moisture. So these bows rarely delaminated. I don't see, if you read books from the 19th century and 20th century, there's a lot more discussion about the physical properties of bows than there was, say, in the 17th century, or if you look at Ascombe, he was 16th century, and he talks a lot about making sure that your bowyer makes a good bow, and what the procedure was, how you get the bow, and then you see how it goes, and then you might have it shortened to be perfect for your draw length and all this kind of stuff. So even though bows could be manufactured in large numbers, often people bought bows specifically for themselves. I would imagine that when you joined the army, you brought your own bow along, but longbows don't last forever. And it's quite possible that you would be issued with a new bow if your bow broke or whatever. And you might have to. Sorry?
Because it was cheaper to produce.
Oh yeah, this is the great advantage of longbows. I mean, the way they're designed. See, if you have a look at, I will now reach around and get a Neolithic style longbow. So this is a Neolithic style longbow, and if you have a look at the limbs, you'll see that they change quite dramatically in width, and they're thinner here than they are there, and they're actually curved on the back, not on the belly. Now, to make a bow like this takes a lot of time. They're very labor intensive, but to make a bow like this, a skilled bowyer could probably make one of these in a day. Not a good one, but a functioning one, and give him a couple of days, and he could make a very good one, because the process is fairly straightforward, and it was early on was well thought out, because the large number of bows from the Mary Rose don't show a huge variation in style of manufacture. They all are pretty much made the same way. There are differences in weight. Sometimes the cross sections are slightly different, but that could partly it could be because as the bows get heavier, having a high arched belly like this is more problematic. It's more likely that something will go wrong, and you might have the bow chrysal, which is form little ripples across it, where compression of the belly has become a problem. So in reality, they're certainly a lot cheaper than composite bows, but more than that, the process of manufacturing longbows for military uses was clearly well developed. It wasn't an immature industry. Early on, bow making for military purposes, no matter what type of bow, rapidly turned into a very efficient type of industry. Even with composite bows, in Korea today, when a composite bow maker is making horn and sinew bows, they don't make one bow. They make 50 bows at a time or 100 bows at a time. And there's an economy of scale in terms of cost. But there's also an economy in the time spent. And this is true with longbows too. You might, like when the bow is 90% finished, and they've put a string on it, and it's been drawn on the tiller, and they've evened out the curves, which is what you do. There is a point where the bow is 90% finished. You could put it to one side and wait for somebody to come in and say, I want a bow that's in this weight range. And we got 3 over there. Which one do you like? Oh, I like that one. And then say, oh, yeah, my drawer is like this. And they would look at it and look at the shape and say, well, this bow's maybe a bit too long for you, so we can shorten it and adjust the weight. And then they put the horn knocks on and everything. Or they could say, that bow's too short for you. If you kept drawing it, it's going to take a set, which means it incurves. And it's not going to be good. You really need a longer bow. So, you had this discussion with your bow maker to identify which is the best bow for you. In the army, the armies, when longbows were in large scale use, and let's be generous and say from the period of Viking raids, because Vikings had bows that were equivalent to longbows, until the 16th century, when bows were pretty much dead. I mean, they were still being used up until probably the end of the 16th, maybe halfway through the 17th century. It's hard to say. There were books being written about it, the double-armed man and things like that. But during that period, the way armies were organized is not like armies are organized today. So you didn't join up and you were issued with a uniform and boots and weapons and all that kind of stuff. You brought most of your own stuff. And one of the reasons you got hired was because you already had the right kind of stuff. If you turned up with a bad bow and a blunt sword and that, unless they were desperate, they might, send you away. And that kind of recruitment, I mean, English armies got quite professional in the period of the 100 Years' War, because they were attempting to invade another country, even though half of the English nobility actually owned land in France. But they had to, it's when you're conducting raids a long way away from home, you actually have to have more professional armies, because otherwise you can't get organized to get there with all the appropriate equipment.
Yeah.
So they were forced into that. It's not saying that the French didn't have professional armies, but the focuses of the two countries were different. And say the Flemish in Flanders, the Netherlands, they had a different focus on their military. And the Holy Roman Empire had a different focus. Again, it all depended on what the makeup was, what you were doing. Like Italian cities often had militias that were part-time soldiers, and it was part of your civic duty to, either provide a soldier or provide money to help support a soldier to defend your city. So there's a wide range of ways that people could be in the military, and none of them are like a modern thing where you've got regular salaries. And what they used to do in the old days with mercenaries and even any paid soldier was they would never pay them on time, so they have a reason to stick around to get that next pay. So they were always, to some level, in arrears paying the soldiers, because otherwise the soldiers would say, well, I've got my money now, and that guy over there's offered me, a groat a week more. I'm going over there. But if they already owed you, 50 pennies or whatever it was for 3 months' work, well, you're not going to go until you get your 50 pennies, are you? So this was, it sounds like they were really inefficient, but they were adapting to the requirements of the time. The paymasters, I mean. So, it's very interesting. I mean, people that study these kind of things keep finding really interesting methods. I mean, you are in business in the sense of the study of how business works and things like that, and how people kind of manage to work together to get things done. Well, think of what it was like back then when they didn't have that kind of organization. There wasn't a salary structure. I mean, we know how much people were paid because the English in particular, a lot of their documentation survived from the Middle Ages in the pipe rolls and things like that. There's excellent studies of how soldiers were paid and how expeditions were financed. But it's not like today. And I think sometimes people try and shoehorn the past into modern ideas. Oh, well, if you could get good army, you'd just go out and buy it. No, you wouldn't, because A, you mightn't be able to get to the place where they make the good armor. B, you mightn't be able to pay for it. C, the guy that makes the good armor might already have orders going 3 years in the future, or whatever. Because being an armorer was a very stable job. You've got a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it's just not, the world is not the same. Rich people could do the same things as rich people can do now, which is get first in line and whatever. But the average person would be lucky to get exactly what they wanted. And archers, say, in the English armies in the 100 Years' War, or even in the Wars of the Roses, which were even more violent, or in their conquests of parts of Scotland and the conquest of Wales and all this kind of stuff, the archers in particular, would rob the bodies of dead men-at-arms and knights to get pieces of armor, because they couldn't afford it otherwise. And if it didn't fit them, they could then sell it to somebody else. So, I mean, they often talk about bodies being stripped and naked after battles because everything was reused. A pair of shoes, just pull them off the guy's feet. And when they say naked meant at the time, didn't necessarily mean skin. It could be just in your underwear, because maybe nobody wanted to steal your underwear, but you never know. So a lot of equipment didn't arrive through your employer supplying it. It arrived through you stealing it. They didn't consider it stealing if you won the battle. So, but things like bows are different because they were more,
Okay, so it was about the grasping the bow grip. And now let us move on to the hand pulling the string, right? did they have different methods? How do they hold it?
There were two main methods with one variation, which could be applied to either method. The first method is 3 fingers.
Mhm.
So you had 2 fingers under the arrow and 1 finger above the arrow. Usually, you wore a set of fingers attached to straps attached to a wrist strap. So you would have 3 leather fingers to protect your fingers from the pull of the bow. As far as I know, the modern idea of tabs was not known at the time, though it would have been perfectly functional. And the other thing is because they didn't, these finger protections weren't thin. They are made out of vegetable tan, often oak tan leather. It was, we're not talking hugely thick, but it was thick enough that when you wet it and put it on and bent your fingers, you could actually get a permanently shaped piece that would just fit your fingers into the right shape and you just release. Modern gloves that you see, like if you went to an archery shop and bought a glove, they're usually made out of chrome tanned leather, which is soft and flexible. But the old gloves probably weren't anywhere near as flexible, particularly not for heavy bows, because the style of shooting was more vigorous. I mean, it wasn't, like it wasn't standing at full draw for a minute, just getting things right. It was getting to full draw and shooting as soon as you had a solid aim on what you wanted to shoot at, because the bows were too hard to hold at full draw for a long period of time. And while you're standing there aiming precisely, somebody else could be aiming at you and shoot you before you had a chance to do anything. So speed of shooting in the sense of getting the arrow on the bowstring and having it shot, that was important. The number of arrows you shot in a given time, problematic, whether that was a significant thing. But the ability to get your arrow out of your quiver, put it on your bow and shoot, that was important. It was important in all armies because your rate of fire can be important if there's a particular tactic where you shower thousands of arrows on your enemy, which there were in some cases. But your ability to get a shot off when you needed it quickly was important to everybody. I mean, you only have to ask modern bow hunters. And, look, if you're sitting in a tree stand, and I'm not talking about compounds because you can hold a compound at full draw for a long time, but with a recurve or a longbow, if you're sitting in a tree stand and a deer walks around the corner, then you've got to be able to draw and shoot really quickly.
Yes.
And you've got to be stable when you get back here to shoot. You can't be sometimes coming here and sometimes coming there. It always has to be the same place, wherever that place is, but it always has to be the same. So you've got to be able to get to the right place, aim and shoot quickly, but precisely. So all of these archers, I mean, we've been, as historians and the general public interested in this, have been oscillating between did they shoot at individual targets or did they shoot at a line of men? And everybody who's done archery knows that it's a lot easier to shoot consistently if you're aiming at a small target. You can focus better on it. If you said shoot at that line of men there, then maybe you would shoot at the guy over there, the guy next to you would shoot at the guy there, and the guy there would shoot across that way. You'd have arrows, but you'd have random accumulations of arrows.
Yes.
So that there might be some part that would get 100 arrows land there and another part that 5 arrows landed. And that's not effective if you don't know where these are going to happen. So probably what people would do is they would aim at the person directly opposite them. Now, if they hit that person, and we've said this many times in discussions, if they hit that person great. If they hit the person next to them, great. Or the guy on the other side. Doesn't matter. As long as you hit somebody. But if you just shot at a line of people, just, I'll elevate to this level and then I'll just shoot. Now, you can train for that. I'm not saying you can't. But the problem is that you have a random density of fire along the line. And what commanders would generally like is, if you're going to have different densities, they'd want the high density at a place they nominated, not some random place along the line. So that's my understanding of how you would do it. I'm not saying that everybody achieved that, because medieval armies were not highly drilled. They were drilled to some extent, we know that. And while the individuals may have been highly skilled with their weapons, they weren't necessarily trained to all shoot at once. That was a thing that was really a product of the gunpowder age, because guns were so slow to reload. And if you didn't have guys set up to shoot either as groups, like one group shoots, the one behind them's ready to shoot, the one behind them is loading their guns, or you had to everybody shoot at once in volleys, then you had to have some kind of defense to stop people charging in while you were reloading, which pike and shot. You had pikes to defend the musketeers. With archery, you still were vulnerable to cavalry charging you, or infantry that were really close suddenly racing at you before you could get another arrow off. But you could still shoot more arrows quicker than somebody with a muzzle loading, particularly an arquebus, could shoot. So therefore, the logic of the tactics that you would take into battle was dependent on your rate of fire. The better your rate of fire, the less danger you're in. The nimbler you were, the quicker you could get out of the way or get behind the men-at-arms. So the English had this system of bowmen and men-at-arms, where the men-at-arms were heavily armoured. They were knights and wealthier people that often had, depending on the period, in the later period they had full plate armour and melee weapons. These people could do a lot of damage, and they weren't frightened of cavalry charges so much, because horses don't want to run into a wall of metal.
And Pete, another question: why do they put the arrow on the other side of the bow, from our perspectives?
Okay, well, this is really interesting, and there's some modern internet chatter about it not being a thing, because a few people have looked at paintings and noticed the arrows are randomly. They didn't notice they were random, but they noticed that some of them were on the thumb side. If you look at the same painting and look at archers on the other side of the painting, they're on the other side because the artists were not archers and were not interested in depicting it accurately, because their patrons were also not archers. Their patrons were knights and dukes and earls and kings, or abbots of monasteries. And if they did archery, they only did it for sport. Hunting being the major sport they like. So the reason generally given for shooting on the left-hand side of the bow for right-handed archers, which is over the forefinger for most, is that as you release with your fingers, you give a slight pressure to the string to travel that way. Now, because of the flexing of the arrow, the string actually doesn't follow a straight line or a single curve. And that initial push towards your arm causes the nock to go towards your arm, the arrow to curve that way, and then when it reflexes, it curves the other way. That's a bad use of the word reflexes, but it flexes again. It goes around the other way, and that gives you a better clearance of the bow. Now, you can shoot on the other side of the bow, and I've done it for years, because as a person who shoots thumb ring style, it's easier for me to aim when the arrow is on the right-hand side of the bow, because I'm used to it.
Yes.
However, I will point out that people that use the 20th century style of Mongolian archery, where they use a thumb ring, but they still shoot on the index finger side of the bow, and the way they stop the index finger knocking the arrow off your hand is they actually knock below the arrow, so the arrow is there and their hand is down there. When somebody that's used to that shoots on the right-hand side of the bow with a thumb ring, which they're completely used to using, their aiming goes completely off because their brain is used to it going in a particular way, which is all their practice has shown them that's what it's going to do. Now, Mongolian archers that actually practice the older style, which there's a lot in Mongolia today as well, they shoot exactly the same as everybody else shooting with thumb ring. So my guess is that they shot on the right-hand side of the bow, not because anyone did any analysis of what was going on, but because Dad and Granddad did. And you see it in countries that use finger releases today, where there is no influence of manuals and training, where it's just families and clan groups and tribal groups, like in Kenya and in Papua New Guinea, that they always shoot on the index finger side of the bow if they use a finger release or one of the secondary or tertiary releases. And I think the second reason, not the technical reason about the arrows moving and things, but the second reason is when you're holding a bow like that, and you've only got your fingers, it's hard if you're bumped or knocked by somebody to stop it falling off the thumb. But if it's on that side of the bow and you say you cock your index finger and it's sitting in that groove there, it's more stable because you can grip the knock of the arrow with your fingers and hold it against that side of the bow if you want to, and that's what I did. But it's not a common way of doing it, and I don't think it ever was. But it doesn't mean that people didn't do it. It's just that they were not in the majority and they were not noticed, because the medieval paintings of archers, the arrows were drawn in at the end of the painting process. And we know from discussions of diaries of Renaissance painters that often the apprentices were giving the minor work. So the master would do the faces and maybe the robes and the stance and everything. And the apprentices might do things like drawing rings on fingers and maybe drawing the fingers if they were good at it. So there wasn't a audited vision of what it should end up like. Like, make sure everybody's sword is on the left side and everybody's, arrow is on the left side and everybody's, it wasn't that precise because they weren't trying to produce a manual of archery. They were just trying to illustrate a story generally. And I think it's probably misleading to think that you can rely on these. I had long discussions with Lars Anderson when we were discussing this by email, and he sent me some medieval paintings, which he said, well, look where the arrows are, and yes, they were on the right hand side of the bow. But when I looked at people in different parts of it, sometimes they're on the right, sometimes they're on the left. It was what the artist felt like. And in Persian painting, almost never you see the arrow on the wrong side of the bow. And that may be because the patrons who paid for the books were probably all trained archers, and they might look for it. They might not. I don't know. But it may be that it was the audience. The audience was interested in it, and maybe they noticed these details. I don't know if they did. I mean, there's lots of writings about the appreciation of paintings in Persia and histories of painters and things like that. But I can't remember seeing any references to where they said, oh, this guy was really good because all the details are right. He always puts the ring on the correct finger for that ring and all this. I don't know. In the Luttrell Psalter, where they have a really good evocative painting of some yeomen shooting at the butts, basically mounds of earth and clay, and for targets they had wreaths of twigs and leaves that they stuck on them, and you had to shoot in the hole in the center. They show the arrows really accurately. They show the points. They're a special type of point for this type of shooting. They show the fletching, but one guy's shooting on the right-hand side of the bow and another guy behind him is shooting on the left-hand side of the bow. And one is right-handed and one is left-handed, I think. Maybe it's another one I'm thinking of, the right and left-handed. But you do see this where right and left-handed are there, and it doesn't seem to be showing ambidextrous archers. It just seems to be that the artist didn't care. And to give you a modern example of this, if you watch any kind of history YouTube channel, and they start using images from old images, if they want the character to move from left to right, they will reverse the image, not caring that his sword goes from his left side to his right side, not caring that, you know, his clothes button up in reverse. None of this matters because they're not focusing on that. What they're trying to do is get the authenticity of the image matched with the movement that they want to indicate in that scene. And you cannot judge them on the grounds that, well, that's totally unrealistic. I've seen the original painting and Gustavus Adolphus wore his sword on his left side. That's not the point of the illustration. And the same thing is true for medieval European manuscript paintings. The point was not to be a manual for how to do things. The point was to get across a general impression of what's happening.
Yes. And regarding aiming, how did they aim? Do we have any records?
Well, this Toxophilus does have a bit about aiming. It's not as mechanically explained as in, say, the Persian ones we dealt with, or the Arab or the Turkish ones. There didn't seem to be an interest at that level. We do know that there was both direct and indirect aiming. So direct aiming is where you use the point of the arrow to point it somewhere on the target, either the top of the target or the middle of the target or the bottom of the target, and left or right to adjust for left or right flight. But there was another style of shooting that was much more popular later on, but probably developed in the Middle Ages, where when you were shooting at long distances, you would actually aim at, say, a feature in line with the target above it in the background, like a tree branch or something. Yeah. And when you were shooting at short distances, you would pick a spot on the ground and aim at that, and the arrow in its natural rise would then hit the target. That's called point of aim shooting, and it's almost certain this was developed quite early because it's so utilitarian for the type of shooting that they did. In the 19th and 20th century, point of aim shooting among longbow archers, actually you would get, for the shorter distances, you would get a little circle on a stick or something and stick it in the ground and use that to aim at, and you would know exactly what distance to put it from the shooting line for your bow to hit a target at the distance you were shooting. So it was quite technical, but it was nothing like sights. The idea for sights is documented coming in, and I think it was in America in the 1940s or maybe the late 30s, where the idea of a sight was, and you'll love this, you get your bow, because they were using longbows, and you glue a piece of felt on the back of the bow above the handle, and you get a pin, like a pin for sewing, and you stick it in the felt at various heights, and that was your sight. That's how you made a sight. Anyone could do it. I think for a while they were illegal in competitions because everybody said, "Oh no, that's not fair," and then everybody started using them, so everyone said, "Oh well, fair enough, we'll do that." But now archery competitions in field shooting that are divided into bare bow and sighted bows. So that people that shoot in the old style without sight don't compete against the people who shoot with sights. And of course, modern sights are much more precise than a pin in a piece of felt.
Yes.
I mean, you know, you've got all kinds of adjustments to make them give you a better sight picture and everything like that. Plus, you can have things in the string to line up, and it's wonderfully inventive.
Okay, that's what we talked about. And in a longbow archery, European style, do we have also kneeling positions, sitting positions, squatting positions?
To be honest, I've never heard of sitting positions. Kneeling positions for hunting, yes, I've heard of that. And that was because they didn't just the types of hunting, and there's a book on this, the book of Roy Modus by a French aristocrat, minor aristocrat, and they had things like they would have hides built in the forest, which you squatted inside and shot out of. So you could be kneeling and you could be standing, depending on how the height was. They had fake or real cows that they hid behind, so that the wild animal wouldn't see them coming. They'd see the cow, but they wouldn't know that there was a person behind it, because animals rarely count the number of legs under a cow. So there are all kinds of things where you could kneel, and with a longbow. So I'm not sure I could do it with this one, but with a longbow, it was more appropriate to my height. You've got, well, let me see. If I'm kneeling and the tip of the bow is just above the ground, that would be round about my eyebrow height. So if you were shooting long distance, you could do it kneeling. You would lose distance by not being standing up, but not a lot. And the advantage of kneeling in a field where there was ditches and things like that, you maybe were out of sight, you could just pop up and shoot and pop down and disappear. It doesn't seem to have been at the level that you see in the Middle East or in China. So in the Middle East, kneeling, squatting, and sitting were used regularly in target competitions. And once you'd learned how to do that, then you could use it in battle, particularly defending cities, because it was much easier to get into small places and shoot out through slits in the walls and stuff. European castles had slits in the walls, but they seem to be pretty much designed for people standing. So they weren't trying to cramp as many people in, maybe, I don't know. I think that the effort put into shooting heavy longbows, you really don't want to be worrying about if the limb is going to hit the ground because you've decided just to shoot a bit further down than you normally do. I think that the added complication into the shooting probably discourage people from doing this kind of thing. I think the most variation in stance was in hunting, and a lot of hunting was done. So they may have known it, but it wasn't in schools. It wasn't like we're going to do this target range and everybody has to squat to shoot. They wouldn't have anything like that.
Okay, so that was this. And another question I have, we talked about it probably a bit, but let us just expand on it. Let us talk about different arrowheads they used.
Okay, well, one of my friends has moved house, and temporarily I have some of the reproduction arrows that he made. Oh, wait a minute, I'll put this up here where it's safe. Here's the first one. This is a hunting head.
Whoa.
And I think in English they call these bearded, on the grounds that that the word for barb has a similar origin as the word for beard. Maybe that's where it came from. I'm not sure. See if I can get this. Wait a minute. I might not be on the right camera. Oh. No. No, I'm on the right camera. Yeah. As you can see, these are all socketed. After the Anglo-Saxon period, you rarely see tanged arrows in Northern Europe. Now, for the barbs or the sockets, the barbs have two advantages. In general terms, you get a greater length of cutting surface, and the undercut of the barb takes weight out of the arrowhead, so the arrow goes further.
Yeah.
And the second one is, once this goes in, it's very hard to get out.
Yeah.
Because it's like having two hooks, and they're sharp too. So if you're trying to pull the arrow out, it actually can do more damage coming out than going in.
Yeah.
There's the old Hollywood trope of pushing the arrow through, which risks doing more damage on the way through. The famous occasion of when Henry V, when he was the Prince of Wales, was shot in the face, they went to a lot of trouble to pull the arrowhead back out. And they had ways of covering, like they would insert into the wound something that would cover the barbs. So when they pulled it, like a tube, like you'd make a tube out of parchment or something and slide it down, they'd break the arrow off, slide it along till it covered those. So when you pulled the whole thing out together, the barbs weren't sticking into the flesh, they were covered by a tube. So, I mean, that was one of the ways of dealing with it. But getting shot by one of those was really nasty. I now will withdraw actually, we'll stay on broadheads. It's a bit rusty, but this is life. This one is more leaf-shaped.
Leaf-shaped, yes.
These don't have as long a cutting edge as the barbed ones. And that barbed one wasn't an extreme one. I may still have in the house a medieval arrowhead, a real one, not a reproduction, which the barbs were actually like long, unsupported, just the blades extended. There was nothing supporting them except for their own thickness. But this one, this type of arrow was used in England, well, the arrowhead style was used in England back into the Saxon period. They are easy to pull out. I don't know whether that was because from a hunting point of view, you didn't want to be hacking up your animal. When you were getting the arrows out, you wanted to only do the butchering that was necessary. And if it was a great deal of difficulty getting the arrow out, then maybe it wasn't a good idea. But on the other hand, I don't know. I mean, I can see the advantage of barbed arrowheads. People say, oh, well, that's so the arrow stays in the wound and wobbles around and causes more damage to the animal. But modern bow hunters are using bows that are not as heavy as the bows that were used in medieval times, shoot arrows completely through animals. So, and they're the same animals. They're a deer, wild boar, and things like that. So I have a feeling that barbs, their main purpose was to save weight. Their secondary purpose was to stop people pulling them out. So generally speaking, this is quite a narrow head. When you compare it to the barbed head, you can see that the barbed head is a bit wider, and there are obviously bigger barbed heads than this. So I would generally see them as anti-personnel. I'm seeing if we've got any other variation. Oh, out. So here's another barbed one. That's rather well proportioned. But let's get out some bodkins, because when they were shooting at people, people cunningly started wearing armor to stop bullets going in. So this is a, oh, this is interesting. This is a three-sided bodkin. It would be particularly effective against male because it would split the rings. It would have some effect against wrought iron plate armor if the armor was thin enough. It certainly would be nasty. And points like this aerodynamically do not cause too much problem in the flight of the arrow, so that they act like target arrows in the sense that they're very accurate. They're much heavier, but they're still very accurate. And if you're wearing a helmet that's got slits for your eyes, there's a chance by accident that an arrow shot at your face might go through one of the slits. This type of arrow much more likely than some of the others. I think there's some really long. Okay, this is a four-sided long bodkin, and the general consensus is that these were designed specifically for use against male, because the idea is they would enter into a ring, split it open, and then drive deeper through whatever padding and do damage to the person inside. Even, if only that match of the arrowhead gets into the person, it could either hit an artery, which is very bad, it could hit an organ, which is very bad, or it could get stuck in a muscle and stop you from raising your arm or something like that, which could be very dangerous when people are trying to kill you. So, I mean, I'm seeing if there's any other type of bodkin thing here. He made a lot of arrows, this friend of mine, and he had a real taste for. Now this is another. I haven't seen too many three-faced bodkins like this, but they're a particularly well designed shape. He's got a few of them. Let's see if there's another type. No, the majority of these. So these are modern made, and you can see they're pretty good. I'll have to find out from him who the maker was he bought these off, because they're uniform, they're very solid, and I think they do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Standard arrows for target and things like that were not shaped like that. They were generally just conical. There are types of bodkin arrow that are specifically for plate armor, they believe, though this may or may not be true, which have flattened diamond section heads that are wider about a third of the way down and then taper in. So the idea is they punch a hole in the plate, and the biggest part of the arrowhead is the first part through, and then the hole is big enough for the rest of the arrow to go in with less resistance. There are another type called a type 16, because there's a classification of arrowheads excavated in England, and a type 16 is like a flattened diamond section bodkin, but the edges extended to two tiny little barbs. And some experiments shooting at various targets suggest that they're quite effective. They certainly, because they're so small, they fly very well. And again, this gives you the opportunity of getting quite accurate and accuracy, even though you might not hit who you're intending to. If you're at the right height for a face, and the guy next to the guy you were shooting at suddenly lifts his visor and you miss your guy and hit the next guy, you're still going to do a lot of damage. So one thing that we missed when I was talking about how they pulled the string, we mentioned the three-finger type, but a lot of the paintings, and I know we said that paintings aren't reliable for arrow position, but I think they're reasonably reliable for finger position, show two-finger shooting. And it's shown in similar frequencies to three-finger shooting, and it's shown in situations where you would imagine they're very heavy bows. Since you can draw an extremely heavy bow with a thumb draw, which is basically concentrating all of the pressure into one digit, it is within the reasonable possibility that shooting two-fingered,
Yes,
very heavy bows was quite practical. And you might say, well, what's the advantage of it? It put more stress on the individual fingers, but when you shoot with two fingers, it's much easier to get a clean release. When you've got three fingers, that ring finger often drags on the string, or the middle finger doesn't disengage properly and you get a drag. This is why tabs became so popular, because it evened that out. But on modern bows, like, up to 60 pounds, two fingers for most people would probably be well within the realms of possibility. So that was a thing. And the other thing that I think is important is that you could hold your fingers straight against the string, or you could hold them at an angle against the string. This one where the fingers are on the string at an angle is called a Fisher release. And it means that when you shoot, there's less movement, less deflection on the string, which gives you a more precise aim, or for some people. See, the problem with archery is every individual has slight variations in how they do things and how their body is working. So something that works for 10 people might not work for the next two. Absolutely. So you can't. Yeah, this is where it's very hard to be dogmatic about what should be done. And this is why I say, even though I'm at the moment convinced that most people shooting three-fingered or two-fingered shot off the left side of the bow if they were right-handed. It doesn't mean that there weren't people that didn't. And there might be people who, through a combination of dominant eye and other things, it was better for them. So the kind of slight disadvantage of being more easily knocking the arrow off your hand on the bow and having it drop on the ground might have been, in some people's cases, it might have been compensated for by the fact that they actually shot better and felt more comfortable shooting that way. You've always got to be a bit careful about, making blanket pronouncements about how something works.
And the last question, Bede, I would like to ask you is about, you wanted to compare a longbow and also other bows here you have, Japanese bow.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, of the various differences. We've made some comments about the longbow and the Neolithic bow.
Yeah.
In particular, it's to do with cross sections. Though the Neolithic bows often were shorter, because the flattening of the bending section of the limb meant that you could be more efficient at shorter lengths, and maybe that made them better hunting weapons. Whereas the longbow, the whole purpose of it in the later period was for war, and its secondary purpose was for hunting. And the shape of a longbow is really designed to get the most out of the particular tree that they favoured, which is the yew tree, and to take advantage of the sapwood versus the heartwood and all this kind of stuff. Whereas this kind of bow, they didn't care. And these bows, I'm going to try it, as I did before, I will show you how much difference in length there is between the two bows, which is considerable. They're both roughly the same weight, draw weight. This one is around about 60 pounds, and this one says it's 60 pounds, though, as I say, I can't brace it, so I don't know. I'll see if I can arrange to have it braced and fix it up. Now, the comparison is the other famous longbow, which is the Japanese bow.
Yeah.
Now, not sure I can do this. And this one's strung because I can string the Neolithic bow as well, but I didn't think it was a good plan. Now, if I keep the ends of the bows level at one end, let's see how far we can go. Now we're starting to. This is the Neolithic bow's tip is there.
Yeah.
Now, as I go further away, the longbow's tip is there, and the Japanese bow's tip is up here.
Yeah.
Now, the Japanese bow is as in degree longer than the longbow, as the longbow is longer than the Neolithic bow.
Yeah.
The modern Japanese bows, which this obviously is one, are laminated. The very early Japanese bows weren't. Modern Japanese bows have one recurved end and one non-recurved. Well, no, it's not recurved, which is an unusual thing. Old Japanese longbows, like the ones in the paintings from the Mongol invasion and earlier, the various wars of the Heike and the Minamoto and things like that, they don't have recurved ends. So that was an innovation at some stage, probably in the 14th, 15th century. Japanese experts would be able to identify that. Longbows, they had quite varied cross sections because they weren't just made in England. They were made in the Low Countries, and I'm using that term to include Belgium and the Netherlands. They were used in France. They were used in the Holy Roman Empire. It's just not to the same level as they were in England. And some of them had, well, I'll put this down. It's a bit hard to manage all of these at once.
Thanks, Archie. A magnificent comparison. Very good comparison.
Yeah, well, we
always wanted to see all these three types next to each other. Thanks for providing us.
And there's a thing to look at. The longbow is slightly wider at the grip where the arrow goes past than the Japanese bow.
Can I see that?
Though there are.
Can I see that? Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But, I mean, this longbow isn't the widest longbows get, and neither is this Japanese bow, because some bows in Japan were measured by the width of their handle at the arrow pass. Actually, this might be interesting. Now, this is a particularly long longbow for me. The Japanese bow, I'm holding them up so that handles are level. I'll put the longbow on the ground, then I'll drop them down.
Yeah.
So that the arrow pass on the Japanese bow is approximately 7 fingers wide, higher. Oh, sorry, lower than the longbow. And Japanese bows were regularly used by kneeling archers. So that slight difference probably made them a little bit safer to use when you were kneeling. The Japanese technique that you most often see is the left leg, the knee is on the ground and the toes are on the ground, and the leg is at right angles to the direction of the target.
Yes.
And the right leg is extended away from the target and only the foot is on the ground. So the right leg is at right angles to the left leg. This stance is what they use in competitions for stamina, like when you've got to shoot thousands of arrows in one go. Part of the reason it's so hard to shoot, I mean, it's hard to shoot thousands of arrows, let's be honest. But part of the reason it's so hard to, these Japanese contests were so difficult, was you had to be kneeling in this particular stance. And it's really, you really had to be strong to do this. And the bows were heavy because, say, the Sanjusan Gendo competition, the temple Sanjusan Gendo had a long porch, and the height of your trajectory could be no higher than, I think, about 10 feet. But the range was like, I forget now, it's 100 and something meters. So you had to have a very powerful bow to get an arrow to the other end of the hall without hitting the roof or the ceiling joists. And there used to be thousands of arrows stuck in the ceiling joists because not everybody could get the arrows from one end to the other. So that was using very heavy bows in a very particular stance. But the asymmetry of the Japanese bow meant that it wasn't that difficult to shoot kneeling. But on the other hand, a longbow that was shorter than the one I was holding, say one more to my height, I think, like the Neolithic bow, which is probably close. If I stand up, I think it's basically my height. I know you can't see that, but there's no other way for me to do it. So this bow, I could shoot in a kneeling stance.
Yeah.
I'd have to cant it, not hold it straight up and down.
Yeah.
But and I'm assuming that bow is about the length the person of my height would use for a regular English longbow. Maybe a little bit longer, but it would be you would underestimate English and Welsh archers, or Irish and Scottish for that matter, anyone that used a longbow, Danish. You would be underestimating their skill if you thought that they couldn't work out a way of shooting if they were kneeling.
Yes.
It's just that it wasn't part of the tradition as a part of sport or regular military training, as far as I can tell.
Absolutely. Bede, do you want to add something to our discussion? It was very interesting. Thank you very much. Do you want to add anything else to our discussion today?
Well, the only thing is to remind people that the English longbow, as we know it, not the sporting bow of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, but the original war bow type of bow, was particularly designed for warfare, both in its production to get the most number of bows out of a tree and to produce them quickly, and in its weight. So the length was to enable really heavy bows to be drawn to a normal draw length. That extra length reduced the stress in the wood, and the thicker you make a bow, the more stress the belly and the back are going to be, or the back and belly. And therefore, that design, that longer bow, and the Mary Rose bows are longer than, say, 18th or 19th century longbows were for comparable people, is to take to give the bow enough flexibility that you can shoot it thousands of times without it fracturing or breaking or something like that. So that these bows, longbows in particular, most of the design criteria that went into them was to make an effective weapon of warfare, as opposed to a sporting implement or a hunting bow or whatever. I mean, you can make lighter longbows for hunting and sport, and people do, and they work perfectly well. But the war bows are, the basis of the design comes from the war bows, not the other way around.
Many thanks, Bede, for our discussion today. It was very interesting, and I'm going to invite you again for other discussions on different types of archery. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That was a pleasure.